Dropping a full tray of dirty champagne flutes on the head of the most dangerous man in Chicago was, statistically speaking, the kind of mistake that ended careers. Or lives. For Molly Kowalski, it ended both and somehow started something else entirely. The Grand Marquee Hotel on Michigan Avenue was not the kind of place where a girl from Cicero with flour-stained sneakers and a secondhand blazer 2 sizes too small was supposed to work. Molly knew that. She'd known it the moment she walked through the service entrance on her first shift. Clutching her little black notebook and already apologizing to a potted fern she'd bumped in the hallway, but the rent on her studio apartment was 4 months overdue. Her mother's dialysis bills weren't going to pay themselves, and the hotel paid $3 more per hour than the diner on 47th Street. She was 26 years old, 5'4", and carried every one of her 262 pounds with the resigned awareness of a woman who had spent her whole life being the biggest person in the room. Her dark hair never quite stayed in its bun. Her uniform polo shirt pulled across her shoulders in a way that no amount of strategic tucking could fix. She knocked things over. She always had, in high school. Her physics teacher had once told her she was personally responsible for more unplanned experiments in kinetic energy than the entire rest of the class combined. She was not, in other words, the obvious choice for banquet waitstaff at the Grand Marquee's 48th-floor private event suites. But her supervisor, a fretful man named Gerald who sweated through his shirts even in winter, had been desperate. 2 staff had called in sick. There was a private dinner in the lakeside suite. The guest list was small, 12 men, no women, and the tip pool was reportedly extraordinary for anyone who didn't ask questions. Gerald had pulled Molly aside in the service corridor. "Just keep your head down," he'd said, blotting his forehead with a cocktail napkin. "Don't make eye contact, don't speak unless spoken to, and for the love of everything holy, Molly, please watch where you're putting your feet." She had nodded sincerely, already catching her elbow on the doorframe as she walked into the suite. The lakeside suite ran the full length of the building's north face, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a Lake Michigan that looked, on that February night, like hammered pewter. The table was set for 12 with the kind of precision that made Molly briefly nervous to breathe. Crystal so thin it seemed to be made of frozen air, silverware that probably weighed more than her car payment. The men already seated were quiet in the way that expensive, dangerous men tended to be quiet. Not the silence of people with nothing to say. The silence of people who didn't need to say it. Molly loaded her tray in the service corridor, stacking 6 flutes of Dom Pérignon with the focused intensity of a woman diffusing something. She made it 4 steps into the main room before her left foot found the single imperceptible ridge in the carpet where 2 panels had been seamed together incorrectly. Later, she would have time to reflect that it wasn't entirely her fault. The carpet was a liability issue. Gerald had probably known about it. But these thoughts would come much, much later. What happened in the moment was this. Her foot caught, her center of gravity shifted in the precise wrong direction. The tray tilted, and all 6 crystal flutes of $200 champagne launched from the silver platter in a slow, sparkling, catastrophic arc. They landed directly on the man seated at the head of the table. Not the side of the table. Not a nearby guest. The head. Where the most important person sat. The silence in the room did not change in volume. It changed in texture entirely. It became the kind of silence that had weight. Molly was on her knees on the carpet, surrounded by the ruins of 6 champagne flutes, looking up at a man she did not yet know was Rafael Soto. He was sitting very still. Champagne dripped from his dark hair. His charcoal suit, the kind of suit that probably had its own insurance policy, was soaked through across the left shoulder and chest. He was somewhere in his late 30s, sharp-featured, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved specifically to express displeasure. His eyes were very dark and very, very calm. That was the terrifying part. Not anger. Calm. The other 11 men at the table were not moving. "Oh," Molly said. It was not the most eloquent thing she had ever said. "Oh, I'm going to, here." She grabbed a cloth napkin from the floor and began, instinctively, to blot at the sleeve of his jacket. which was the wrong instinct because no one touches Rafael Soto without permission, a fact she would learn 30 seconds later when a very large man in a very dark suit appeared from nowhere and put a hand on her shoulder with enough quiet force to stop her mid-blot. "Don't," the large man said. "One word, absolute." Molly sat back on her heels. She looked up at the man at the head of the table. Her face was, by now, the specific color of a stop sign. Her bun had entirely given up and was listing to the left. She had a shard of crystal on her knee and champagne on her chin. "I am incredibly sorry," she said. Her voice was shaking, but it was loud. She had never been able to do quiet shame. It wasn't in her. "I caught the carpet seam. This is my fault and I will pay for the dry cleaning. I know that doesn't help because this is obviously very expensive and it'll be a payment plan situation, but I will." Rafael Soto looked at her. She stopped talking. His expression had not changed. He studied her the way a man studies something unexpected. Not threatening, not charming, not performing in any direction. Just looking at him with genuine distress and genuine accountability and not a single gram of calculation. In his world, that was more unusual than the champagne. "Get up," he said. His voice was low, accented faintly, not quite Spanish, something more specific, Sonoran, and utterly controlled. Molly got up. She smoothed her uniform polo with both hands. She looked him dead in the eye because she had been raised Catholic and her mother had told her, "You always look people in the eye when you apologize." "You caught the carpet," Rafael said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes, sir." "Not the first time someone's done that." "I know, probably not." "Gerald knows about that seam." Molly processed this. "I see." The ghost of something moved across Rafael's face. Not a smile. The structural precursor to a smile, somewhere in the architecture of one. He picked up the one remaining champagne flute, somehow untouched at his elbow, and held it out toward the large man who had stopped Molly's blotting. "Marco, get the carpet fixed tomorrow, and bring her a new tray." That was it. He looked back down at the folder in front of him. The other 11 men at the table resumed their quiet, expensive breathing. Molly stood there for 3 full seconds, blinking. Then she went back to the service corridor, leaned against the wall and pressed both hands over her face. Gerald appeared beside her, pale as uncooked pasta. "You're still alive," he whispered. "You just told someone to fix the carpet," she whispered back. Gerald looked at the ceiling. "Oh God," he said. "That's somehow worse." Molly Kowalski did not know that first night that the Grand Marquee's 40th floor was booked on a semi-permanent basis by Rafael Soto and his associates. She did not know that associates was a polite word for the senior leadership of the Soto Syndicate, a criminal organization that had, over 30 years and 2 generations, built itself into the dominant power across the Midwest corridor, freight, ports, and distribution lines from Chicago to Kansas City, with fingers reaching south into Houston and west into Las Vegas. She didn't know any of that. She knew the tip she found tucked under the edge of an empty bread plate when she cleared the table was $500 in cash, held together with a silver money clip she was certain had been placed there deliberately. She left the money clip on the concierge desk with a note that said, "Found this in the Lakeside Suite. Molly, banquet waitstaff." 2 days later, Gerald called her into his office and told her the guest in Suite 481 had specifically requested her for his weekly Thursday dinner service. "You should say no," Gerald said, in the tone of a man who had already decided he was going to recommend she say yes, because his own job might depend on it. Molly thought about her mother's next dialysis appointment. She thought about the collection notice she'd found in her mailbox that morning. "I'll do it," she said. The Thursday dinners became a fixture. 8 weeks of them. Molly carried trays, refilled water glasses, and managed, by some combination of prayer and athletic focus, not to destroy anything else of significant value. She was not invisible, the way Gerald kept advising her to be. She wasn't built for invisible. She took up space, she always had, but she learned to take up space carefully, efficiently, with a kind of cheerful purposefulness that seemed to confuse the men in dark suits who stood against the walls. They watched her the way cats watch something they haven't categorized yet. Rafael Soto watched her differently. She noticed it on the fourth Thursday. She was reaching across the table to retrieve an empty bread basket and caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't name. Not the way men usually looked at her, which was either with the faint, reflexive dismissal she'd grown up with, or occasionally with something worse that she'd learned to shut down fast. This was neither. It was the expression of a man trying to solve something. She pretended not to notice. She was better at pretending than people expected. What she couldn't pretend was the night of the 8th Thursday, when she overheard something she absolutely should not have. She had been in the service corridor adjacent to the dining room, waiting for the right moment to clear the soup course, when the conversation on the other side of the panel changed in tenor. The careful, measured business speak gave way to something harder. She heard the name Victor Aguirre, a name she didn't know yet but would, and the phrase, the downtown warehouse. And then, very clearly, make sure there are no loose ends before the port audit. Molly set down her tray very gently on the service cart. She walked back to the kitchen. She did not say anything to anyone. But her hands were shaking when she loaded the dessert course, and she dropped a chocolate torte in the service corridor, and she ate 2 bites of it off the floor because she was stress-eating, and the situation seemed to call for it. She was still crouched on the floor when she became aware of a presence in the corridor. She looked up. Rafael Soto was standing in the hallway outside the lakeside suite. He'd stepped out from the main room, his jacket off now, collar loosened, a glass of something amber in his hand. He was looking at her with a particular expression of a man who has just found an unexpected complication. That was a $40 torte, he said. I know. Molly straightened up. She had chocolate on her knee. Add it to my tab. He looked at her for a long moment. What did you hear, Molly? The use of her name. Her actual name, not the waitress, not her, knocked something loose in her chest. She chose to be honest. It was, as her mother had always said, the most expensive habit she had. Enough to know I should forget it completely, she said. Which I already have. I have a terrible memory. My 4th-grade teacher wrote it on my report card. Rafael studied her. You're not afraid? I am completely afraid, she said. I'm just from Cicero. We don't have a lot of extra bandwidth for showing it. Something shifted in his expression. The same structural precursor to a smile, and this time it went a little further. Go home, Molly, he said. Don't take the blue line tonight. Marco will have someone drive you. Bats, she started. Not a discussion. She went home in a black SUV, pressed against the window watching the city lights, her heart doing something complicated and inadvisable in her chest. The weeks that followed had a quality she couldn't quite describe to herself. A kind of inevitability, like watching a weather system form on a clear day. Something building that she could see the edges of but not the center. Rafael began leaving her things. Not flowers, not jewelry, nothing that would look like what it was. There was a better cart in the service corridor the next Thursday, one with a reinforced edge that was significantly harder to tip. The carpet seam in the leg-side suite was professionally repaired. A box arrived at the hotel service entrance addressed to her, a pair of non-slip catering shoes in exactly her size. She held up the shoes in the break room and looked at them for a very long time. Her colleague Darnell, who worked the bar and missed nothing, leaned over her shoulder. Those are $300 shoes, he said. I know, Molly said. For a waitress. I know. Molly. I know, Darnell. She kept the shoes because her feet had been killing her for 2 months, and she was not a fool, even when she was being one. The thing about Rafael Soto, the thing she filed away carefully, in the part of her brain that was always watching, was that he never touched anything he wasn't certain of. Every action was deliberate. Every word chosen. He ran his organization the way a master chess player ran a board, 3 moves ahead, no wasted motion, nothing left to chance. And yet, he asked her questions. Small ones at the end of service in the moments when his associates had filtered out and the table was being cleared. What part of Cicero? What she'd studied. She'd said business administration, 2 years at community college, then her mum got sick and she'd stopped. He listened without performing sympathy, which she appreciated more than she could say. "You reorganized the private cellar log," he said one Thursday. This wasn't a question. She had. It had been a disaster. Inventory listed by arrival date instead of category, bottles missing from the record. She'd fixed it in an afternoon because chaos offended her on a fundamental level. "It took me 4 hours and a lot of guessing," she said. "But I found a standing order someone's been duplicating for 8 months. You've been paying for 14 cases of Barolo you never received." Rafael put down his coffee cup. Very slowly. "Which vendor?" "Artisan Select. The rep's name is Todd." He looked at her with an expression that was halfway between something dark and something that looked almost like delight. "Of course his name is Todd," he said. Molly laughed before she could stop herself. It was her real laugh, too loud, kind of wheezily unhinged. And she clapped a hand over her mouth the instant it escaped. Rafael looked at her hand over her mouth. And then the rest of the way something went in his expression. The controlled architectural precision. And he laughed. A quiet sound, real and unpracticed, that made Marco, standing by the window, physically turn to stare. The laugh disappeared, but something had cracked. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. In her experience, 26 years of it, in Cicero, in used blazers, in the specific financial precarity of a woman whose family had never caught a break, things that felt this good had a mechanism. There was always a catch, a condition, a moment where she found out what the warmth was really for. It arrived on a Thursday in April. She'd been late to the service entrance that night, delayed by a call from her mother's care coordinator. She took a shortcut through the parking garage, a thing she'd done 100 times, and came around the concrete pillar at the far end to find 2 men she'd never seen before, waiting in the narrow corridor between garage levels. They weren't hotel staff. Their coats were wrong, their shoes were wrong, and the way they stood, weight forward, watching the door, was the body language of men waiting for someone specific. Molly had 2 seconds to process this. Then one of them said, "That's her, Soto's girl." She turned and ran, which was not something her body was aerodynamically designed for, but which adrenaline made entirely possible. She made it perhaps 30 feet before a third man she hadn't seen stepped out from behind a van and caught her arm. "Hey, easy." His voice was almost friendly. "Victor just wants to talk." "Victor can call me," Molly said, and kicked him in the shin with her $300 non-slip catering shoes, which, it turned out, had a very solid reinforced toe. He swore. His grip loosened, and she wrenched free and ran for the stairwell door. Made it, got it open. Got 2 flights up, before the door below her banged open, and footsteps echoed upward. She burst through the door, on the 3rd level into the parking garage, grabbed a luggage cart from an abandoned bellhop station, shoved it down the ramp behind her, heard it crash into something satisfying, and kept running. She made it to the lobby. She made it to the front desk. She had the presence of mind to ask for Gerald rather than screaming, because Gerald had a back office with a lock. And while Gerald was not a brave man, his survival instincts were excellent. She spent 40 minutes in Gerald's locked office, sitting on top of a filing cabinet, eating a granola bar from her bag and methodically remembering everything the 3 men had said, word for word, because her memory was not, in fact, terrible. That report card note had been a lie she'd told for 22 years. Her phone rang. "Rafael." "Where are you?" he said. 2 words, no question mark. The control in his voice was there, but something underneath it was not controlled at all. "Gerald's office. 3rd floor, service wing." She paused. There were 3 of them. Aguirre's people. The one whose shin I kicked is probably limping. Silence. "You kicked him," Rafael said. "New shoes. Very good toe box." Something moved through the silence that she couldn't classify. "Don't open the door for anyone except Marco," Rafael said. "He's 2 minutes away." "Okay." She looked at the granola bar in her hand. "Rafael." "Yes." "I'm fine. I just want you to know that before whatever you're about to do." She paused, I have a pretty strong feeling about what you're about to do. Molly, I'm just flagging it. I know you're fine, he said. And his voice, for the first time in 8 weeks, dropped every last brick of its architecture. I know. I can hear you. A pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't leave that room. He wasn't there in 20 minutes. He was there in 14. She heard the commotion before he arrived. A kind of organized, professional chaos moving through the hotel with quiet efficiency. Marco appeared first, let himself in with a nod, and stood by the door in the way large, reliable men stood when they were guarding something important. When Rafael came through the door, she saw immediately that he had not come straight from the office. His knuckles were raw. His collar was open. There was nothing in this moment of the careful, controlled man who'd once handed back a champagne-drenched napkin without changing expression. He crossed the office in 5 steps and put both hands on her face, tilting it gently to check the bruise forming along her jawline from where she'd hit the stairwell wall. "You're all right," he said, but it wasn't to her, it was to himself. "I told you." Molly. His thumbs traced the edge of the bruise with a gentleness entirely at odds with the state of his knuckles. "I need you to understand something. Okay. This is not safe. What I am is not safe. What you've ended up in the middle of." "I know what you are," she said. "I've known for about 6 weeks." He went still. "You run organized crime," she said. "Midwest distribution, primarily. Some port operations. Victor Aguirre is a rival who's been trying to move on your territory and apparently decided I was a useful pressure point, which, for the record, is extremely rude." She looked at him steadily. "I'm a waitress from Cicero with a business administration certificate and a mother on dialysis. I've never been naive. I just needed the job to be real more than I needed the situation to be clean." Rafael looked at her for a long time. "You've never said anything," he said. "You never asked." "If I had asked, I'd have told you." She held his gaze. "I'm not afraid of what you are. I'm practical. What I'm afraid of is being the person you make choices around without telling me. I can work with hard truths. I can't work with protected ignorance." The silence in the room was different from any silence she'd experienced in his presence before. All the other silences had been his, controlled, deployed, chosen. This one was something he hadn't expected to be sitting in. "Aguirre won't be a problem after tonight," Rafael said. She decided not to ask for specifics. "Okay. You can't go back to this job." "I know." She'd already accepted that in the stairwell. "I need someone who can run the accounting division of my hotel holdings. The legitimate ones. There are 11 properties across 4 states, and the books are being managed by a man named Stewart who charges me $400 an hour to make mistakes I could find myself with a flashlight and 10 minutes. He paused. "You found an 8-month billing fraud in a wine cellar log in one afternoon." Molly looked at him. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a future," Rafael said, "in whatever form you'll take it." She was sitting on a filing cabinet in a locked service office on the 3rd floor of a hotel, with a bruise developing along her jaw and granola crumbs on her uniform polo shirt. He was standing in front of her with raw knuckles, an open collar, and every careful wall he'd built visibly absent. She thought about her mother. She thought about her rent. She thought about the carpet seam and the shoes and the way he'd said her name that first night like it was a word he intended to keep using. "I'm going to need health insurance," she said. "Good health insurance. My mum is on dialysis." "Done. And I want to see the actual books before I agree to anything. If Stuart's been running them, I need to know the real damage. I'll have them sent to you tomorrow." She looked at him carefully. "And you have to tell me things, actual things, not enough to make me a liability, but enough that I'm not the last to know when someone's going to grab me in a parking garage." Something shifted in his face. Something that had been locked for a long time and was now, quietly, opening. "Yes," he said. She got down off the filing cabinet. She was still several inches shorter than him, which didn't change anything, and still 262 pounds of soft curves and dark hair falling out of its bun, which didn't change anything either. She looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and the distance between them became, by some specific gravity she'd stopped trying to fight, very small. "I knocked champagne on you the first time we met," she said. "I remember. And you fixed the carpet." The carpet was a liability issue. Rafael. "Yes." "Stop talking," she said, and she kissed him. Practical, direct, no preamble, the way she did everything. And he kissed her back the way a man kisses something he has been thinking about for 8 very careful, very deliberate weeks. Marco, standing by the door, looked at the ceiling. He stayed there until further notice. The hotel on Michigan Avenue kept its 48th floor booked on Thursdays. The carpet stayed fixed. Gerald received an anonymous bonus at Christmas that was large enough to make him weep quietly in the parking lot, which he assumed was unrelated to everything. The books across 11 properties were, as Molly had suspected, a disaster. It took her 3 months to clean them up, and another 2 to build the kind of system that didn't require trusting a man named Stuart. She worked at a desk that had been placed, deliberately, adjacent to the window with the best view of the lake. She still knocked things over. A priceless ceramics vase in the hallway of the Milwaukee property. A full carafe of water onto Rafael's laptop during what she was later told was a very important video call. An entire display of quarterly reports during her first senior staff meeting, which she gathered up off the floor with total composure, while 11 people watched and said, to no one in particular, "Numbers don't trip over their own feet. I, however, absolutely do." Rafael, from the end of the table, said nothing. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her from the first night, like she was the only unmanufactured thing in a room full of performance. His people, over time, stopped being confused by her. Tony Morales started bringing her breakfast from the taqueria 3 blocks from the West Side office because she'd mentioned once that she missed the taste of real carnitas. The driver, Marco, enormous, silent, had once dislocated a man's shoulder with casual professional efficiency. Waited an extra 10 minutes outside the building every morning to hold the door because Molly had mentioned her knee was acting up and the heavy revolving door was difficult. She was not invisible. She never had been. But she had spent her whole life being invisible in the way that mattered. The way where people looked through her rather than at her. Nobody in Rafael Soto's world looked through Molly Kowalski. One Thursday evening, very late, the lake black and glittering 48 floors below, Rafael stood behind her while she closed out the last of the quarterly files. He put his hands on her shoulders and rested his chin on the top of her head. "I'm going to need you to stop finding things," he said. "My accountants have developed an anxiety condition." "Then your accountants should have found them first." "Molly." "Rafael. The Stewart situation cost me 18 months of compounding errors across 6 properties. I know. I fixed them." "I know you did." A pause, and his voice dropped into the register he only used with her, absent of architecture, absent of performance. "What would you have done if I hadn't come to find you in that stairwell?" She thought about it honestly. "I'd have called my mom," she said, "eaten the rest of the granola bar, figured out the next step." She tilted her head back to look up at him. "I've always figured out the next step." He looked at her with the expression she'd stopped trying to name months ago because it didn't need one. It was specific to this, to her, to them, to the 8 Thursdays and the champagne and the non-slip shoes and every careful, deliberate, irreversible thing that had followed. "I know," he said. Outside, Chicago spread itself out against the winter dark, all cold light and deep water, indifferent and magnificent. Inside, the woman from Cicero, who had never been built for invisible, sat in the warmth of the most dangerous man in the Midwest and felt, for the first time in 26 years of complicated living, precisely, exactly where she was supposed to be. I keep thinking about the carpet scene. Not the champagne, not the warehouse, not the kiss in a locked office on the 3rd floor. The carpet seam, that one small, stupid flaw that Gerald knew about and never fixed, that sent 6 crystal flutes of $200 champagne onto the most dangerous man in the room because that's where everything started. Not with a grand gesture or a perfect moment. With a trip. With a fall. With Molly Kowalski on her knees on an imported rug, offering to pawn her kidney for dry cleaning money. What I find myself returning to, again and again, is that Molly didn't survive that night because she was lucky. She survived it because of who she already was before she walked into that suite. She had spent 26 years being underestimated. Too big, too loud, too much. And instead of shrinking, she'd built something quiet and iron-strong inside herself. The kind of integrity that doesn't perform. When Rafael asked what she'd heard in that corridor, she didn't lie, didn't calculate, didn't try to maneuver. She told him the truth, because that's what she did. That's who she was. And in a world built entirely on deception, that was the most disorienting thing he had ever encountered. There's a version of this story where Molly sees the danger clearly and runs. A lot of people would. Most people would. But she made a different calculation. Not a reckless one. Not a naive one. She looked at her mother's dialysis bills and her overdue rent and the genuine, unperformed way this man had fixed a carpet and ordered non-slip shoes in her size, and she decided that hard truths were something she could work with. That took a specific kind of intelligence. Not the kind that scores well on tests, but the kind that reads a room, connects dots in a wine cellar log, spots a billing fraud in an afternoon that a salaried accountant missed for 8 months. The kind of sharp, practical mind that doesn't announce itself. And then there's the parking garage. Molly alone in a stairwell, outnumbered, nobody coming yet. She didn't freeze. She kicked with her good shoes. She grabbed a luggage cart. She ran. And when she finally got somewhere safe, she sat on a filing cabinet eating a granola bar and committed every word those men had said to memory. That's not luck. That's a woman who has been solving hard problems with limited resources her entire life, who never had the option of waiting to be rescued, and so she learned, bone deep, to be her own first response. What Rafael ultimately fell for wasn't the chaos or the clumsiness. It was the combination. Someone who told him the truth when lying would have been easier, who found the fraud he should have caught himself, who survived the warehouse parking garage on her own 2 feet before he could get there. Cause and effect, operating quietly across 8 Thursday dinners. Every small, unremarkable act of honesty and competence and stubborn forward motion accumulated into something neither of them had planned for. I think about people I know who are waiting for the right circumstances, the right job, the right moment, the right version of themselves, before they start being who they actually want to be. Molly didn't have that luxury. She showed up in a polo shirt that pulled across the shoulders and did the work she had in front of her with the tools she actually had. And she never once apologized for taking up space. That's the thing nobody tells you about changing your life. It rarely starts with a perfect entrance. Sometimes it starts with a trip on a carpet seam. And everything you are already, every unglamorous, hard-earned, quietly carried piece of yourself, doing the rest.